Reed, we are delighted you could join us this morning. You are our first official guest. When we were talking yesterday, I was worried that 5 inches of snow we may have to reschedule, and then I did realize that your office is basically a stone's throw away from here. So no, I'm very happy you could join us and help us kick off the show. And so the purpose of our podcast is to sit down with folks like yourself who are having a positive impact on not only your hospital but healthcare systems in North Dakota as a whole. But before we jump into your obviously career in healthcare and your current role at CHI here in Bismarck, I was hoping you could take us back to the beginning and tell us a little bit about where you grew up.
Yeah, actually I was born and raised in eastern Montana, small town, Terry, about 800 people. My parents owned a couple businesses in town. My grandparents had a ranch north of town, and the homestead ranch that my uncle was on was south of town. So grew up had a class of about 30 kids in high school. Most of us spent K through 12 together. Lived in town, but spent a lot of time, out in the country and doing those things we do. Of course, I'm old enough. It was back in the day. You'd get on your bike in the morning and go, and Mom would ring the bell at night, and you'd come home. And the rest of the time, wherever you landed at noon, you'd eat at their house, or you'd eat at somebody's house, or whatever. And it was kind of a big community, big family, and grew up that way. And it's about between Miles City and Glendive. So I've always considered between Billings and Bismarck to be home. Be home. I have lived in Grand Forks the last 3 years, really enjoy that community and still have a home up there too. So, but spent quite a bit, most of my career in, I would say I call it the far west, Midwest, kind of Montana, Idaho, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Nebraska. And so got my start actually in a small community and grew up wanting to be a teacher and a coach. Did that for about 5 years, actually started in a Catholic school in Miles City, teaching and coaching. Catholic school closed due to finances. And ended up in Ray, North Dakota, up by Williston, and I was the head football coach and taught social studies and social sciences and did some PE and whatever they'd let me do, and worked up there for about 3 years and went back to graduate school at Idaho State. And got my degree. Actually, my master's degree is in psychology and special ed services. My career path at that time was going to be a special ed director and then a school psychologist. And then I got a specialist degree in school psychology. But all my elective courses I took in administration, because ultimately down the road my far goal was to be a school superintendent or a principal in that range. But I practiced as a school psychologist for 15 years. Actually started in a behavioral health hospital in Idaho Falls, Idaho, and then moved from there to Lincoln, Nebraska, and worked for the Lincoln Public School System in Lincoln for 4 years. Our kids grew up, got a little bit older, started missing family, so we decided to move back to eastern Montana. And then I was a special ed director and school psychologist in a cooperative, which was a multi-county cooperative. We served about 15 school districts in eastern Montana, so did a lot of outreach, a lot of travel, served kids in country schools. It was a lot of fun. I went all over. Actually worked Department of Corrections during that time as well, so a lot of vast experience. And then my hometown, I was at Thanksgiving, I was home to see my mom and dad. We lived about 40 miles away. And my mom and dad, we were visiting as you do at the holidays. And they said, the local hospital, I think the administrator's leaving. I think it's going to close. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Why is that? Well, they're struggling financially, and it's been difficult, and they're not sure what they're going to do, and they can't find anybody to apply to be the administrator. So on the way home, my wife and I visited a little. I thought, maybe it's time to try that career path, because as a school psychologist, you work a lot with pediatrics, you work a lot with physicians, physical therapists, occupational therapists. So I had a good feel, and I had worked in a hospital previously. So I thought, worst case scenario, I'll go up and, we'll fail, but at least I give it a shot. So I applied for the position. Of course, I got it because I was the only one that applied. And so, but they didn't offer health insurance at the time. And the hospital was in such dire straits that they didn't have health insurance for their employees. And so I said, I want the position, but I really can't take it without some type of benefits. And so Glendive, Montana at the time, Glendive Medical Center was providing the oversight for the physicians. So they contacted Glendive, and Glendive said, we'll do like a management agreement. We'll hire him because he's familiar with the counties and the communities out here. We'll use him for outreach. and at the same time, we'll help mentor him in the business, and then he can be the CEO in Terry in a small hospital. So really learned it from the ground up. Started off, I got a boiler license because I was a backup maintenance guy, did the billing in the morning. We didn't have HR, so did the HR stuff for an hour a day, kind of every aspect you can touch. Learned to ambulate patients, learned to do what I could do for patient care, even though I didn't have that certification, but what I was allowed to do. And then, of course, the psychology background in that, I was fairly good at relationship building and things like that. So started to learn, and then I had the advantage that I had an aunt whose brother was the president of the Montana Hospital Association.
Okay.
So he reached out and said, "Hey, we'll help you any way you can." And I found out that healthcare is like a brotherhood. Everybody's like a big fraternity, sorority type, and it was a little different than the schools. Schools are pretty good about working within their own district and working across lines a little bit, but hospitals are very supportive. And so I found out that if I had any questions, I had all these 45 different CEOs that were actually willing to help. And that's when it took off, and that's kind of when I kind of fell in love with that administrative leadership style because of all the camaraderie that happened. And so 5 years we were successful, able to turn it around. We didn't have money to make the first payroll, had to borrow, and then we made the second payroll, and month by month. And after a couple of years, we changed processes and changed some certifications and licensure, and we were able to be successful. And the hospital is still open there and doing really, really well in a town of, now it's about 500 people. And it's not in the middle of nowhere. It's close to where they could easily close, but I'm pretty proud of that. And that was worked well. And then I moved over to Dickinson and I went to work for CHI because I had family there. After about 5 years, was there 10 years. And then 3 years, had a great opportunity to go up to Alexius Health and work in a really strong independent hospital in North Dakota, and got experience. I got a lot of experience. I had a lot of different leadership that I got to work with and for, and so that helped a lot. And then when this position came open again, with my ties to Western North Dakota and Eastern Montana and family, and it just felt like a natural fit.
No, it's funny that you mentioned small town there where you grew up in Terry, Montana. That I'm from Ireland, and so I grew up in a small town as well. But I think our perception of small town is definitely different. So my perception of a small town is 15,000 people.
Yeah.
And I think I maybe had 600 in my high school class growing up. So Terry, Montana sounds like it was a lot smaller than what I would consider a small town anyway. But one thing that you'd mentioned there was you went into psychology. You went to school for psychology. And so, what was the reason that you went into psychology as a field of study? Growing up, did someone in your family, close friend, or maybe influence that decision? And so if you could speak a bit more about psychology and why that was something you wanted to study.
Well, yeah, growing up in a small town, the big thing for us was activities, sports, everything you could do. I was a little better at sports than I was at band and chorus and those things, so that's where I gravitated to, and so naturally you get into that and you build those relationships, and I was fortunate enough that I had great classmates and good people and good coaches, so we were successful. So then that built in me the idea that I enjoyed competing, and because we won a lot. Maybe if we hadn't, I wouldn't have enjoyed it, but we were fortunate enough to have, like I said, surrounded by good people, and so we were able to do that. And with that came teaching and education. But as I got into education and I started to teach more and coach more, you really do build strong relationships with the other teachers, but also with the students. And the students often share things with you that maybe they don't share with other people. And I had a couple instances where people shared some personal things that had happened to them that, and I had some special needs kids and special ed kids that gravitated to the classrooms and how I taught. And so that was the impetus to move into psychology, was to figure out a way to work closer with the students. And school counseling was okay, but a lot of times in school counseling, you spend time scheduling and doing those things. You're not really doing that day to day where you can drill down and really help the student to find success in whatever they're trying to do, or help them through a crisis, those type of things. And I didn't even realize that school psychology was really out there. So I started to do research, found a couple programs, was able to get into a real quality program at Idaho State, Pocatello, Idaho. And with that, I was able to leverage and learn more about myself in my strengths and weaknesses as a person and as a teacher, but also able to recognize and help other people to help them to achieve their goals. So, and I always got a strong sense of achievement for that. By seeing others succeed has always been something in me that's driven me and given me energy, is to watch others succeed more than my. It's always fun to succeed and win, but it's nice when you can position other people to give themselves an opportunity to be successful.
So small town Montana boy, born and raised. I did read up on your bio, and so before you went to Idaho State, very good football player from what I read. You did have an opportunity to go to Dickinson much earlier than you did on a football scholarship.
Yes.
Turned it down, I'm assuming?
Well, yeah. A football coach was from Dickinson State, and actually I was a little overwhelmed. I probably didn't have enough confidence in myself at the time, but I went up for a recruitment visit, and I went up to got recruited for football. By the time I left, they wanted me to play basketball, football, and catch for the baseball team. And I got in the car, and I was like a little bit overwhelmed at the time, and wasn't sure if, being small town, I mean, you're good with your friends, and we were successful at different levels, but I don't think I had the confidence at that time to take all that on. And so I looked for a place where I felt a little more confident. So I went to Black Hills State and just played football for a couple years, and
what
then
position?
decided to. I played tight end and defensive end. Yeah, so I was okay.
You were in
but,
olden days, Rob Gronkowski.
Yeah,
Is that what you're telling me?
not close to Rob, but maybe off the field, but not on the field. So, but no, and so. I think once I figured out that athletics wasn't going to be the ultimate goal, academics, I was always a fairly good student, so I enjoyed that side of it too. So,
No, I think that's fantastic, and obviously going to Idaho, I'm sure that was maybe a big change coming from small town Montana. One thing that hoping you can touch upon a bit more is you started out in special education and obviously working as a teacher and as a school administrator. What was the decision, or maybe talk a bit more about the reasons why you decided to leave the school system and go into healthcare? I know you had mentioned that there was a small hospital that needed some help, but why move into healthcare after spending 15, 20 years?
That's a great question. I think the real reason that I moved into healthcare was, one, it was an opportunity to do something a little bit different, a little more challenging to myself. But also I had become a little bit disenchanted at the school system. It felt like in school administration you were spending a lot of time, maybe you didn't have enough time to really focus on the needs of the students, or you're focusing a lot on parent interactions, teacher interactions, those type of things. And it felt more like you were limited in the amount of influence you could have compared to the influence you could have being a hospital administrator. It's a little different setup, and the board is really a fiduciary board, but they hire you to handle it. Where a lot of times on the school side, the school board really makes a lot of the decisions, and then you're just asked to carry those out. So it's a little different leadership style, and I have great respect for those people that stay in education and work that way, but it really didn't fit my skill sets.
When you made that change from education to healthcare, was it what you expected, or were there some things that cropped up that you thought, well, wasn't expecting this?
It wasn't at all what I expected. It was much more difficult.
Okay.
There was a big learning curve for me on when you stay in one profession for a while, like education, you learn those acronyms. You don't realize how much you're engaged in that culture of education. And I stepped out of one culture and came into a different culture. Like I said, what I really enjoyed was the camaraderie and the support and the help that I didn't get as much of in education. There is that, but I didn't get as much. But the learning curve, learning the business side, the operation side, the budgeting side, the finance side, there's a whole business aspect to it. So my strengths were in relationship building, I would say, in most leadership. I could step into leadership positions and provide some confidence and direction and take accountability and not hesitate to do any of that. But learning the business aspect of healthcare, and healthcare changes so rapidly, and it's the most regulated business. So it was that challenge, which I really enjoyed, but at times I was overwhelmed, because you just get to the point, okay, I think I've got it, and then it changes. Yeah. And then I think I got it, and it changes. But now, after I've been in a while, it almost becomes addicting because there's so much to go, and your days are so busy. But I like that aspect of it. I like being busy. I like being the one that's accountable.
Yeah.
I like having purpose, and I like making sure the people around me have purpose and understand what they need to do. And I've seen a lot of people have success. Maybe not because of me, but I was happened to be there to support or help a little bit. But a lot of it's based on their own hard work. But if there's any way that I could help or direct them or help them move, I think that's important to do. But I think it was more being busier and having more accountability is why I moved into healthcare.
No, I think that's fantastic. One thing you had mentioned there, and I've been probably exposed to it this year, is the amount of regulation in US healthcare. And so I obviously come from a country where healthcare is free, something I really didn't need to worry about growing up. But yeah, in the last, particularly this session, been exposed to, the amount of things that a CEO has to keep in mind outside of just the day-to-day operations of their hospital. And so cut your teeth in some smaller facilities in Montana, and then around about 2009, I think it was, you made the move to CHI in Dickinson. Yeah. And so what was that move like, moving from a 2 or 3 bed facility to CHI in Dickinson, particularly at a time when the world was in chaos just after the 2008 financial recession?
Yeah. It was a difficult move, and I think part of the reason I actually applied and was so anxious to take it on is I was probably a little naive at all the responsibilities that were going to fall upon me. So I think that naivety was kind of good for me, because I probably stepped into something that now I would maybe be a little more hesitant. But they had a lot of difficulties. They had a lot of strong, good people there and good leadership. And for whatever reason, the hospital had fallen on hard times and had to close multiple service lines and was struggling financially and was being asked to go from a 100-bed to 49-bed to a critical access to 25-bed. The community, maybe 5 to 10 years earlier, had the first oil boom that kind of hit. And when the people had left, they were still hesitant about wanting that, because when it ended quickly. And a lot of people left and businesses closed, and it was a tough time for the community. And healthcare was very, very important to them, but the hospital was had just having a difficult time for whatever reason. And so I was fortunate that I had family in the area. I was fortunate that I was familiar with Dickinson and had been for quite some time, and just decided to throw my name in and given the opportunity. I had a lot of critical access experience. We had really done some really good things in Montana for that little hospital to keep it up. We'd done some very creative financial process changes and just increased and improved in every way. And so I had some basic core idea of where I wanted to go. But the most difficult thing for me was learning to work within a system. Okay. Because when you're in a small independent and you're on your own, you can kind of make those decisions on the fly. Mm-hmm. You know, you can add who you want, take away who you want, and you can move quickly. You can be nimble. And when you move into a system, that nimbleness kind of goes away, and you have more people to be accountable for, and you just have more justification. But all that was good for me. I needed that. I needed to learn to drill down deeper. I had to learn to be a little more timely and a little more precise in some of the communication. Had to learn to really dive down deeper into the financials and work hard. And I actually hadn't had a lot of experience working with a larger physician group. And so I had only had 2 mid-level physicians, PAs at the first place. And so I walked in and had I would say a fairly good-sized medical staff, 20 to 40 physicians and APPs and things going on. And we didn't employ any of them, so they were all independent at the time. So they all had their own contracts in ways that they felt the hospital needed to work with them. So between picking up a hospital that was struggling, moving into a community that wanted the hospital to be successful but wasn't sure if it could be, having physicians and physician groups that didn't have confidence in the system, and having a system that didn't know me and probably didn't have a lot of confidence in me right away. It took about 3 to 4 years to work through all of those issues, and it was a lot of work, and it was very demanding. And but when you're surrounded by good people, I had an excellent board. I had excellent leadership in the hospital still, and good people at all levels. And the physicians were just a very caring group who wanted it to be successful. So eventually we all found a way come together and move forward and make it work. So.
No, I can imagine the community could have been probably skeptical, considering you turned down their football team years prior and joined their football team. One thing that I would say is maybe different to your role in Montana versus when you moved to CHN Dickinson was the fact that it's part of a Catholic health system. Was that something that factored into your decision making, or something that maybe played a part in why you also made that change?
You know, it really did, and I didn't realize the impact it was going to have, and I'm glad you asked me that, because when I grew up going to the hospital and getting our health care in Miles City, we had a small hospital in my hometown, but when we were, for those major things that happened, and I had several things as a child that needed to be taken care of in large, we went to Miles City, and that was a Catholic hospital, and so I was always had the women religious, the sisters were always there and part of it, and in my mind it was natural. I didn't realize the impact, though, that the sisters and their influence and the history and all that, and that really resonated with me after I started there. And actually, probably two of my best mentors were both the sisters that were on the board. We had sisters that were on the board that both had healthcare degrees in healthcare, and they both had run larger systems, one in Ohio and one in Kansas. And they agreed to come in individually. The one came in until she retired, and then the other one came in. They come in about 2 hours early or 3. They would fly in for our board meetings, and then they would sit with me and work through and ask me, what have been your challenges, and just do a mini little mentoring strategic planning session with me before every board meeting every month. And the knowledge that they passed on to me, and the way that they distribute knowledge, and the way that they handle meetings, and it's just a different sense. And so I really appreciated that, and I really came to admire all the work that the women religious do and the sisters do. And kind of really the main reason it drew me back here is because I had strong relationships with 6 or 7 of the sisters at the monastery, and they came to our charity ball every year and sat at our table and got to know them very well and became friends. And my wife and I became friends with several of them, and then just learning the history and all the things that they do and how hard they work for the people, it just really, really resonated with me. And that was the main thing that was different about the Catholic healthcare.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, actually, as both of us are University of Mary graduates. And I think that for me especially, that's one thing that took me back when I first came here and went to UMary, which is Catholic based also, was the willingness to help others. And it didn't matter what day it was, what time it was. If you needed help or if you needed advice, there was always someone there willing to help. And it sounds like that was something you experienced as well, moving to a Catholic health system. So I think that's fantastic and pretty unique with your health system, and obviously at the University of Mary. But one thing that I wanted to talk to you about is during your time in Dickinson, you'd taken over a hospital that wasn't doing so well, I think that's fair to say. But by the time you left, I think it was in fantastic shape and condition. And so I've put down a couple of awards that you received at your time in Dickinson. And so in 2017, you were awarded the Grassroots Champion Award by the American Hospital Association. In 2018, you were recognized as a Critical Access Hospital CEO to Know, and your hospital was also recognized as one of the best places to work on multiple occasions. And so my question is, everywhere you've been able to build a fantastic culture. Why is building a good culture important to you?
Well, I think everyone that comes to work, no matter what job you have or where you work or what you do, it doesn't matter what profession you're in, you want to feel like you have purpose and you want to feel valued. And I think that's two things that you want to instill in people, and that's how you build the culture. And you do that by having intimate conversations, but you have adult conversations is what we refer to them in the place that I work. You have those hard adult conversations. When people aren't doing well, you come in and you have those hard conversations. When they're doing well, you help them to celebrate. And you find purpose, and you want them to be accountable. And once you start doing that and you drill it down through all levels of the institution, and then everybody feels like an owner, and it feels like they're part of something bigger than themselves. And it takes some time, but eventually everybody starts problem solving with the person or with the issue that's closest to the person, and it becomes it becomes a culture where people feel like they can make decisions on their own and do what's best for patients without having to wait, and that when their colleagues aren't doing well, they can step up and help, or they can actually, if their colleague's not doing what is expected, they can actually have a hard conversation and work through it, and work as adults do. And I think that builds that culture from the bottom up. And so that's been the philosophy that I've always started with. And then ultimately, I think the ultimate umbrella is, because I am the CEO, anything that happens in the hospital, I know this can sound, I'm not trying the right word, magnanimous, or when I say it, and that's not what it's meant to be. But actually, I need to be accountable for everything that happens in the organization at all times. If I have anybody in the organization that does something inappropriate or wrong, ultimately that should fall on me, because I should have, somewhere within our leadership structure, we should have been able to help identify or make sure it doesn't happen again, or to change the culture or change the processes that led up to that. And I think when you work through it that way, and you treat people with respect and dignity, and like I said, and you do evaluations, you have to sit with your staff and have honest evaluations, and you do that annually and often, so nothing's a surprise. I think the people that don't really want to be there for the right reasons, they eventually filter out, or they're not comfortable, it's not the right fit. And those people that are there and working hard really enjoy that, where they feel empowered to do what they need to do to be successful, and empowered to take care of the patients as they see as necessary. And one of the things I always joke about is I always say I want the staff to be I want them to be a whoa staff, not a giddy up staff, because I don't want to have to go in every day and spur you to get you to move. I would rather say, you went a little farther today, let's pull back. But I want people to just feel empowered to go out and make decisions and work hard and do what's best based on what they know, because we have a lot of quality people that I work. Everywhere I've been, there's been strong people, good boards. Everybody wants to do the right thing. Nobody shows up at work and doesn't want to do the right thing. But a lot of people just don't know what their purpose is, and they don't feel empowered or like they have the ability just to make some decisions. And I think you can work through that, and the culture will build itself.
Yeah, I think that's a very Midwest saying there, whoa or giddy up. I might have to add that to my vocabulary. One thing I've been watching recently, and I probably watch too much YouTube maybe, but I've been fascinated with Deion Sanders, or Saunders, I think is how you pronounce his last name. And so, obviously, famous, very good football player in his time. And then now as a coach, he was at Jackson State, I think, maybe a couple of years ago. College that wasn't doing so well. He comes in, and all of a sudden they're winning their championship. And then now recently he's just moved to Colorado University. And one of the reasons why it fascinates me is his son does an amazing job with the video production, but you get an insight into someone who has taken over an organization, or in this case a college that wasn't doing so well in the past, and you can see him episode by episode change the culture there, where they're going, and hopefully they're going from a place where they weren't doing so well to maybe a high-performing football team. And so one of the things that I'd noticed from him is he's got some, I would call them building blocks when it comes to building a culture. And one of the ones that I found funny is punctuality. So I'm usually never on time. And so I thought, well, I could never go to Colorado University and play football. But my question is, and I think you've just touched upon a few of them, when it comes to building a culture and you making a meaningful impact, what are some of the building blocks that you like to implement across your organization?
Yeah, the first thing I do when I come into an organization, and we did this at our first employee forums, we talked about my fundamental values, and it's humanity, clarity, and courage. And we talk a lot about humanity, what that means. Putting a patient in the center, taking care of anybody that comes in. And when I say patient, I mean when we're leaving the hospital at night, if there's a homeless person outside and it's cold, let's find a place for that person to get what they need. Let's extend that mission. So when I talk about a patient, it's any time that anyone needs help with anything, not just maybe somebody that's in there getting medical care, but we try to reach out and let everybody know that we're here as a resource for you, and we will help you with whatever you have. And that's something that I learned from the sisters. And I have a mission director, and she's there and willing to do that. So people can call with almost any, and I want this to, and this is really truthful, call with almost any problem, and we will try to find a way to help them. Now, we don't have all that expertise, and that's not what I'm saying, but a lot of people just don't know who to call and who to connect to. And when you're talking about being healthy, That means a lot of things other than just treating people when they're sick. It means making sure that maybe their kids are struggling in school and they don't know who to talk to. Maybe they just lost their job and you want to figure out a way, do we know somebody who knows somebody? And, we are Western North Dakota, Eastern Montana. We're only 2-3 degrees of separation. Mm-hmm. We all know somebody who knows somebody. So we can usually connect people and help them with whatever that means. But that sense of humanity, just caring for people. When you grow up in a small town, that just becomes when you say, why do you want to help people? I hear this question a lot, who was your mentor that taught you to be helpful, or who demonstrated? That's just a fundamental value that I think all of us in at least this part of the country grow up with. I mean, if somebody needs help, you help them. It isn't something you say, well, should I, or who are they, or why do it? You just do it because that's what you do. And it doesn't matter what kind of help. And you don't put yourself, a lot of people put themselves out more than maybe, others do, but you always help in some fashion. It just becomes a fundamental value of what you do. So I think that's the humanity side. And a lot of times when you work in a big corporation or a big business, you focus so much on operational improvements, finances, all the drama that happens, because we have a lot of that, all the difficulties that happen, that you lose sight of the patients and why we're really there. So we really talk about that humanity part. And when we're getting into hard discussions about making decisions on whatever it takes to make the hospital successful, you always got to make sure that you do have the patient in the middle of that, and that gets lost. And then the second part of that is clarity. You got to make sure communication, almost everything that happens that makes life difficult is a communication error. Mm-hmm. It's either something you over-communicated, under-communicated, wasn't perceived the way you thought it would be. So communication is the key. So we spend a lot of time making sure that what we want to do and how we want to say it, or how we want it to be, how we want things to move forward, is clear. And that helps with that sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. So we set that sense of purpose by saying, put humanity first. Let's make sure our communication is clear and our purpose is clear, so we know exactly what the expectations are moving forward. And that's hard to do, and you know that. Mm-hmm. And then the last thing is the courage. And that's where a lot of people do the first two well, but the courage is the hard part. The courage is to have that immediate hard discussion when somebody goes sideways. It's hard when they need to grab me and say, Reed, you thought that went well? That didn't go well. That wasn't perceived the way you wanted. I need that feedback, probably more often than most, but I need that feedback. But I need people around me to know that they're allowed, they're comfortable doing it. We all need to be comfortable with each other enough that we understand and respect each other's positions. But at the same time, we still need to be comfortable enough and have that courage to have those hard conversations. And I think that's and once you get to that point where people can have those real honest conversations, you start acting like a family, not a kumbaya family, mm-hmm. not where everybody sings around, but a real family where you look out for each other, you care for each other, but you can fight and forgive, and you move. And once you build that culture, which we built in Terry, which we built in Dickinson, once we build that, I think everything seems to move forward on its own.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, particularly with the humanity value. Well, I think that's pretty unique to people in the Midwest. I used to give an example when people would always ask me, okay, what's it like in Ireland, or what's it like moving here? And the example I used to give is when I first came here, outside of a couple of suitcases and a phone, had nothing else. And so if I had to go to Walmart or come into town, people were so willing to not just take me to town, give me their car keys. And so the example that I used to use is I've never been anywhere else where it's like that. And the story that I used to tell, at least out of you, Mary, was if you did that in my hometown, you ain't getting the car back. that car's gone. So,
well, that can happen here too.
So no, I think that those are fantastic. Just going with the communication value. So every day as a CEO, you have to continually make good decisions. And not only make the decision, but then communicate that to your staff. And so I'm curious, as the CEO of CHI here in Bismarck, what does your decision-making process look like? And then maybe a follow-up to that is, how do you make decisions when you don't have all the information?
Yeah, that was a tough one. You sent me that question early, and I'm glad you did. But I was trying to think of a time when we've had to do that. We don't do that very often. We try to get all the information we can, but if you have to do that, if it's an emergent situation, you rely on the experts and the people around you, and you find somebody who maybe has been in that situation before, depending on what it is. But ultimately, I do make that decision because I said already, I'm accountable for what that is. And you just rely on experience. You rely on the experience of others and background and do what you can. But and that does happen occasionally. But time to time, you really hope that you have enough information. And I think that's a big part of being a good leader in healthcare too, is being proactive and thinking about things. And it's a really good question, Aaron, because this morning we had our community meeting where we bring in the sheriff was there, and police department's there, and the fire department was there, and city people, and we talked about some things. And it was kind of fun. We talked about snow removal, but one thing we haven't done it at the end of this. We tend to, like, when the season's end, we're just happy it's over. We just move on, and then we deal with the same issues before. And I think we do that in healthcare, and a lot of times we deal with it. Oh, it worked, and we just kind of set it on the back burner and move ahead. But what we need to do is come back to that and say, okay, we need to debrief about this winter. What happened, what wasn't good. We had employees that maybe should have been parking somewhere else. But we might fix that real time, but then later on we need to change that process, or we need to fix that. We need to think proactively. In healthcare, you try to stay ahead of things as much as possible because things come down, but with all the changes, it's really difficult. But if you're not proactive or constantly thinking about the worst case scenario and then building back, you get caught up in the same cycle over and over, and you end up doing the same things wrong over and over. So and we do that because we have so much going on that we're just happy we're through with that. And we move on to the next thing, but we need to step back, and as a group, we need to say, okay, what went well this week, what didn't, and how, and then we have to sit down and say, what can we change? So, because it might not snow for 2 more years. I mean, not 105 inches, and all of a sudden we don't really care about we're piling snow, and employees don't worry. But when it does again, okay, when it happened 2 years ago, what did we do? And have that, so you don't get caught in a situation where at least you have some information to deal with. So, but you have to be very proactive, and being reactive is a very difficult way to lead.
Is it difficult always having to think ahead and not like in the present moment when you're planning things?
Yeah, it really is. And actually I set aside some time each morning and each evening to do that, to think about what went well today and what can we build off that, what didn't go well today, or what emails did I get of concerns, and how does that work? And that's a great question too. You talked about culture. First thing you do too is I make sure that everyone knows that they have access, and that I'm not gonna overstep their leadership structure, but they should all feel comfortable to email me their concerns at any time. And they feel that way, or text me, or stop by the office. A true open door where you come in and I will make time. And I think that really opens up that communication, and you start hearing the little things that agitate your employees or make life a little more difficult, and you can fix those and then put in processes so it doesn't happen again.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing your decision-making process. There's for sure little bits of advice there that I could probably take and use myself as I maybe refine my decision-making process. And so I know we're coming up on time here. One tradition that we hope to start here on this show is the last guest leaves the final question for our next guest. And so as you are our very first official guest, we decided we would kick things off and we would give you one final question to end the show. And so our final question is, the pandemic was one of the toughest moments in any healthcare professional's career. What is the most important lesson that this pandemic has taught or reconfirmed to you?
I think the single most important lesson for me, and it's something that I always hoped and believed in, but that we can trust people to work from home and do and work above and beyond. We don't have to always have supervision over top of people to have it. I think what we learned is so many people want to do what's right and want to do well. And like everything else that I always find that I'm most proud of in working in healthcare, but almost anywhere, I think in our culture is that when things get really tough, we do step up and bind together. And I know there was some political things and there was some controversy about different things, but overall, we did a fantastic job with care. And I was at Ultra at the time and had a great team, and had a Dr. Bill McKinnon I worked with, and we spent most of each morning helping to coordinate in the region and what was happening. But incident command team was fantastic, and people worked together, and it was tiring, and people put in a lot of hours, but people did what was right. and it kind of reinstilled my faith in people and also the trust that we can trust people to do the right thing. And I think we see that, we continue to see that, where people can work from home and they can be accountable for the things they need to do. And it was always like, before that, we're always like hesitant, like, well, who's going to watch them and who's going to make sure they do what they do? But overall, I think people always want to, I think almost all people gravitate to do the right thing, and they take pride in what they do. And that just reinstilled that.
Oh, I think that's a fantastic lesson learned, and I think that's maybe a great place to end our show today. Reed, thank you so much for joining us and having the conversation this morning. I think as a state, we're so fortunate to have someone like you working within healthcare, and I know you've just started at CHI, I believe, in December. I'm here in Bismarck, but I'm excited to see what you do there, and I look forward to reading and hearing and hopefully talking with you a lot more in the future. So thank you very much.
Yep, thank you. Thank you both.